the goal isn't to have a tombstone that says, I was financially independent. It's to, live a life worth living.
Welcome to The Fi Show, where you'll get a behind-the-scenes look into financial independence. Here's your host, Cody and Justin.
Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of The Fi Show. But before I get to spilling my beans, let's check in with Cody. What are you up to?
Let me spill my beans, Justin. I spent this past weekend visiting my girlfriend at her college in my alma mater, UMass Amherst. There was this fun Oktoberfest where I got to drink some October beers and just have a good time, reconnect with people. How about you, man?
Well, first of all, I think if we wanted to fact check Cody, I'm sure those were not like fancy German beers. They're probably like German versions of Natty Light or Busch Light or something like that. Anyway, yeah. Myself down here in Austin at a work conference, having a good time, staying in the hotel, getting all that free food like I always do. Definitely an interesting trip. And speaking of interesting, I think we've got one of the most interesting guests that you will hear in a financial independence podcast or blog or whatever it may be. We have Colin from BlackjackApprenticeship.com. So he is a straight card counter. He's made hundreds of thousands of dollars at the blackjack table, has led a team that's made millions of dollars, has a documentary. But let's don't give away his whole story. Colin, take it away.
I've always been a saver and pretty cheap and goal oriented. So, if I wanted a guitar amp, I was just going to do whatever, just hustle to get the money to get it. And I graduated college with money saved. And I think I was going to get some $2,000 guitar amp. And then I decided not to buy it, got married. I actually even saved a little bit more than that. I think we had $6,000 in the bank. We actually, when we get married, my father-in-law said, whatever we don't spend on the wedding, we got to keep. And to me, it was like, score, like, let's get this marriage started off with some money in the bank. And I didn't know what for, but I figured it'd be helpful. And that was kind of how we had money in the bank to start the whole card counting thing.
What about like upbringing? I mean, when you're growing up, did your parents, have that as an emphasis? Were they savers? Did you talk about anything beyond saving?
Yeah, they didn't talk about it, but I definitely saw my parents were really frugal. They'd had some years where money was really tight. And I think I just observed that. And the way they didn't teach about money, but the way they talked about it was even kind of a lack mentality. Even when they had money, they acted like they didn't have money. And I don't know if it was just observing that or just being a goal-driven person. I got an allowance and I just didn't spend it. I saved it up and I would think of things I would want to buy. And if there was something important like a guitar, I would go out and buy it and then I would just start saving again. So they didn't teach me, how many people actually do get taught about finances,
Not many.
No. So I wasn't really taught, but I think it was personality and then just seeing my parents be just really tight with their money. I just followed that.
So you definitely have the entrepreneurial bug in you. What were you doing in high school, early college to make money? I'd love to kind of build up that back end of the story.
Well, I remember I lied to the band director. I wanted to be in band because my friends were in band. And I told him that I could play bass, which I couldn't. I didn't even own a bass. But I don't even know why I said it. I think I said, I can play guitar or bass because I figured I knew I'd play guitar. If I could play guitar, I could probably play bass. And he was like, bass, that will work. And so I was able to, get signed up for band. And I spent the summer babysitting and mowing lawns and doing whatever I could to save up the money. I remember I had the money to buy this bass guitar like a couple days before school started. And so I was just hustling whatever I could to, get the things I wanted or even just because I just had that kind of personality. And then I got a job the week I was old enough to get a job. A friend got me a job washing dishes, which is the most fun job I've ever had. Just like we'd just blast music in this dish room and you just work hard and hang out with your friends. It was the worst paying job I've ever had. So I didn't stick with it too long. And then I got a job at a grocery store bagging groceries. And so I had two jobs for a while. And I think it was like, I wanted to buy guitars and then I wanted to buy a car. And then there was always some sort of goal in mind, even if it wasn't like I need this thing. It was like, well, I don't know. I just work to save. I think probably financial independent people get it. You just have that desire to get somewhere and work towards it.
Now, obviously, counting cards is going to be kind of the central focus of the episode, but that also doesn't require education. So I'm curious, as you're coming out of high school, you're getting to be about that college age, were you thinking about college? Did you have a picture of what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Oh man, no. My parents though, education was really important to them. They both had master's degrees, and my brother went on to become an orthodontist, and I figured I'd become a doctor or something. I didn't want to. I just wanted to play in bands with my friends and skateboard, and but college was important. It was basically I'd be on my own, or my parents would pay for college. And I had a grandpa that had said, given some money towards my education. And so I went to college because it was easier than being on my own. And I studied math because I didn't have to read books or write papers. I just had to do my math homework and take math tests. And so it was kind of path of least resistance for me. But no aspirations, which is, I think, why I stumbled into card counting. It was like I had a college math degree and was waiting tables and substitute teaching, and no career ambitions.
So at what age did you actually get started in card counting? So it seems like you have the deadly combination, Colin. You have the frugal, the saver, the person who's goal-oriented, and then you also have this entrepreneurial spirit, someone who wants to make money in like the coolest, fastest way possible. So like that's a deadly combination in and of itself. But when did that actually start?
Yeah, so for me, it was about a little less than a year out of college. Maybe only a couple months out of college, but this was 2002. So there weren't the opportunities that there are now. Now there's so many ways people can start a business, particularly online. You can make a living with a YouTube channel, with a podcast, with, an eBay store, Amazon, FBA. There's just like so many ways. Well, 2002, I didn't even have an internet connection. So, but a friend loaned me a book. He said he was kind of into poker, and then he got this book on card counting and said he was teaching himself. And me being a math guy, he thought I'd be into it. So yeah, I was 22 years old and nothing held me back. And it just seemed like a viable option to even just make $10 an hour on the days I'm not working and just grow something on the side.
So you get this book from your friend, you start reading it, you're a math guy, so it probably starts to click. Like, how do you start dipping your toes in the water? Do you actually go to a casino, or are you just playing with friends at first and trying out these tips and tricks, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so my friend was teaching himself, and he was a year ahead of me. He was playing in casinos, and he wasn't perfect yet, but he was, a lot further along. I'd never even been in a casino. I'd played like penny poker with some friends, but he loaned me the book, and I say I'm a math guy. You don't have to be a math guy to do this. You just have to learn some charts. You have to practice this system, and you just have to practice for a couple hundred hours. And so it's not that complicated. I just started practicing. And then when he would go to the casinos to play, I'd go with him just to practice. And it very, very slowly started coming together. And then I actually took a break from it. I was like, oh, I don't know if this is worth it. I was making $20 an hour giving people burgers at Red Robin, with the tips. And it seemed like an easier gig, this whole card counting thing. But then I kept in touch with him, and I'd be like, oh, how's it going with the Blackjack stuff? He'd say, oh, I'm making $20 an hour. And I'd think, well, I'm doing that with no risk. And then he's saying, I'm making $40 an hour. And it's like, well, that's not bad. Then he's saying, I'm making $80 an hour. And I'm thinking, okay, I gotta look into this thing.
Yeah.
So then it was around that point that I talked to my wife and said, hey, what do you think if I take a little bit of our savings and just try this card counting thing? And she agreed, and it went from there.
So what does a little bit of your savings look like? I'm sure that could be very subjective depending on situation and background.
Yeah, it was $2,000. We had I think $6,000 in the bank, and I said, can I try this with $2,000, which honestly was probably underfunded. I should have had $3,000 or $4,000 to start with, but I didn't know any better, and I just kind of got lucky at the beginning. And I'm really fortunate that I had that savings. If I wouldn't have had money in the bank, I couldn't have. And I think that that's a really common theme for people. If you have some financial cushion, you have the opportunity. When an opportunity presents itself, you can go for it. Not to mention even the fact that people that have financial cushion, they've even done studies that people's IQs are higher. When you're broke, it drops your IQ by about 10 points, just because when you're like paycheck to paycheck, you can't even think about if your car breaks down or whatever. So I've always been a fan of having some money in the bank just so that you can take opportunities when they present themselves.
So as you're practicing and preparing to kind of step up, take that money, go to a casino and put this into action, like at a tactical level, how do you know you're ready? Like as you're practicing and getting ready, like how do you know, okay, now I have studied enough and it's time to step into a casino?
Well, now there's this awesome website, blackjackapprenticeship.com, that has software that, you can basically test yourself and see if you can do it. If you can't do it perfectly in the confines of your own home, you're definitely not going to be able to do it perfectly in the casino. I didn't have that. And so I just thought I was probably good. And I went to the casino and I was awful. And I basically treaded water for 3 months, just like I won some money that was slowly losing it back. And in that previous year, the buddy that got into it or that got me into it, he had actually been spotted by this national card counting team, like one of the more famous of all time. And they saw him playing at a casino and they're like, oh, this kid's not bad. And so they kind of took him on to be one of their trainees. And that was the best thing that ever happened to him because it took his game from being okay. Like I said, we just didn't have training resources back then. You just kind of deal hands of blackjack to yourself and hope that you're doing it right. Well, they improved his game. And so then when I got back into it, I kept bugging him and said, hey, will you deal to me? And finally he did. And I made all sorts of mistakes, but I was able to then clean it up. So nowadays there's software, or you just have to know another card counter that can train you, or you just hope that you've got it figured out. But I think at least 80% of the time, those people aren't playing as well as they think they are.
So at what point did you say, okay, I'm actually making a decent amount of income from this? I know your buddy went from like 20 to 40 to 80, but I know you were working Red Robin on the side because it was nice, it was stable, and you said you were treading water for like 3 months, but when were you like, whoa, this could be a real thing, or I could just do this for the rest of my life?
Yeah. So when I started, I was substitute teaching. I'd quit Red Robin. I was substitute teaching, making $75 a day, to basically babysit high schoolers. But if I didn't get called to sub, I'd go to a local casino and count some cards. And yeah, I was trading water for a while, but the other guy and I, we threw our money together. We started kind of combined our forces. And at first, yeah, we're making $25 an hour. And it's like, hey, that's cool. And then we're making 50 an hour. And it probably around that point, it was like, I'm not going to answer when they call me substitute teach because my time is more valuable in the casinos, And at that point, I still didn't know how high it could go until we got some betting software and I was able to play around with it and see like, oh, wow, it really is like investing. The more you can leverage, the more you can make. And so when I thought, hey, with our $10,000, this is great. We can make $25 an hour. With $20,000, we can make 50 an hour. And that was like, well, with 100,000, we could make $200, $300 an hour at the casinos. And that's what we did. For my career, I won $432 an hour as a card counter. So we just scaled it. We grew it, didn't look back. And I was really fortunate. My wife worked. It sounds kind of awful. She worked full time while I gambled at casinos. But the reality is we were able to live off of her income, which wasn't much, but we had a budget and we were frugal. I mean, I don't think she wanted to be frugal. I think I just was. And I didn't, to me, it was like, hey, let's live off of your income and let's grow this thing as big as we can. And, within a year, we had $100,000 just sitting in the closet and did it that way.
So a couple questions. As you're doing this, you're talking about you and this other guy are kind of sharing notes. He's training you. You're putting money together. Are you actually sitting at the same tables together, playing the same game? And then also, just as a kind of clarification to the other stuff we just talked about, how long did it take you to scale to that? You're talking about, hey, if we used 100,000, we could be making this much money.
Yeah, no, we didn't play at the same tables. His name is Ben. And there's like the stuff in the movie, like 21, the movie, where there's all this subterfuge and people are doing hand signals. And that we did some of that stuff, but it's really not that valuable. Most of it is, it's like an investing club. We're splitting up, going to different casinos, or if we're at the same casino, we're going to different tables and we're investing at the tables. And so the value is that we can leverage each other's money. If you could invest off of a joint, what we call bankroll, a joint investment pool, then we can all make more money. So yeah, we played separately, but every, 3 months we'd kind of chop up the profits, and we got a third friend into it and it kind of grew from there. But I think it took us about 6 months to get to six figures, and we grinded, man. We were like at these little mom and pop casinos here in the Seattle area. We were there like 20, 30 hours a week, which 20 or 30 hours of card counting is definitely full-time job for a real job, because you got the drive time, you got to do your record keeping, add up your money, all that stuff. And you're occasionally getting kicked out of casinos and that stuff. That's about how long it took. And I think after a year or two, I think we started averaging, maybe after a couple of years, we kind of grew a larger team and we averaged about 500,000 a year over, the following 6 years or whatever.
So before we get into kind of the whole team building, I've seen you featured on a documentary. I think you even got featured, your group got featured on the Colbert Report. I was looking at that video as well. Yeah. Crazy. But I kind of want to flash back to like the parent situation. Like, are your parents like, Colin, what in the world are you doing? You show up at Christmas, they're like, oh, what do you do, Colin? You're like, oh, I gamble for 30 hours a week. Like, what is the family and everyone and friends thinking about this?
Yeah, that was pretty tough. Now people can watch, there's, a Hollywood movie about card counting, or they could watch a documentary about the Blackjack team that Ben and I ran. But back then, it was a tough sell. My parents were missionaries, so it's kind of hard for them to tell their missionary friends, one son is a dentist, the other is getting thrown out of casinos. But, over time, I think one, they realized I wasn't a degenerate gambler. And two, they realized, it was like positively impacting my family. My wife and I are getting ahead. We're then traveling. We're helping other people out, starting a family and doing missions work and stuff like that. So I think over time they realized it was a net positive. But yeah, it was kind of a rough go at the beginning.
So you've mentioned a couple times this, getting kicked out of casinos. So what is, the actual legality of doing this, and what can you expect if you do get caught? Like people who are fearful of getting caught, like what should they be thinking about?
So I equate it to extreme couponing. I tell people card counting is like a mix between chess and extreme couponing. It's like this game of skill. You're going against your competition, which blackjack, it's always against the casino, which is better than, I'd feel bad if I was making all my money like taking the other gamblers at the casino's money. I wouldn't feel that bad because, they're not being smart with their money. But I feel way better taking it from casinos because those places are just ruthless. But it's like extreme couponing in that they're offering a proposition. They're saying, hey, come play our game. And all a card counter is doing is playing the game well. It's perfectly legal to use your brain in a casino. And lots of times they encourage it, like you can ask them at the blackjack table, hey, what should I do with this hand? And they'll even give you advice, It's like you're allowed to use your brain, but they don't like it if you use your brain so much that it's costing them money. So imagine you're an extreme couponer and you're just walking out every day with free groceries. At some point they're going to be like, hey, no more coupons for you. You're not welcome to use coupons here anymore. It's the same with a card counter, Casinos have gotten away with treating card counters or even lumping them together with cheaters, but it's ridiculous. A cheater is someone that's violating the rules. A card counter is playing the game exactly how they offer it and just saying, hey, I want to play it really well. So they might treat a card counter like a cheater, but all you're doing is using your brain. And so I say throw you out. They're not going to like pick you up and throw you out of the casino. What they're going to do is they're going to say, Mr. Jones, your game's too good for us. You're welcome to play anything else in the casino, but no more blackjack is normally what they say. Sometimes they'll say something like, hey, you're done here. We don't want you playing here anymore. And I'm as offended as I would be if a grocery store said no more coupons, I'd be like, oh, that's too bad. I was having fun getting all this free toothpaste. But I'm not offended. I know that like, as long as you offer this, I'm going to accept the challenge. It's as simple as that to me.
My understanding was just as far as the movie 21, I thought there was guys with like guns and earpieces that are like beating you down in the back of the casino and leaving you to the dogs and tying you in a chair, but it doesn't sound like that's the case at all.
No. There's some like horror stories from the 70s and that stuff's like awful, but no, like I have friends that a casino basically said, hey, you're not allowed to leave till we sort this out, and detained them against their will, not physically, didn't like cuff them to a chair, just said, you're not welcome to leave. And those people get 5 or 6 figure settlements, because this is America. Like you're welcome to leave if unless they have a reason to actually accuse you of cheating. And fortunately, using your brain is still legal, So that's really all we're doing.
So, Colin, obviously you have the math whiz background. You definitely have a math or engineer working mind. For someone who's looking to just get started, do they need to be a math whiz? Do they have to have an incredible way with numbers? Or like how many hours does it take for someone to get started? And what kind of background skills do they need?
No, you definitely don't need to be a math whiz. Really, the most complicated math is third grade division. So I've got kids and I've got a third grader, and you have to be able to divide 43 by 7 and come to the right answer. And even that's like 43. That's even that's the most difficult you might ever face is something like that. The problem is it's not complicated. It just takes practice. So it takes generally 200 hours of practice, which if that sounds daunting, then don't do it. Don't become a card counter. If you're like, oh yeah, I'll practice an hour or two a night for, a few months, and then I'll have this trade or this valuable skill. The other thing is if casinos being able to tell you you're not welcome there, if that terrifies you, don't become a card counter. But if you're like, bring it on, like I want to go in there, I want to use my brain, I want to take your money, and you're welcome to tell me to leave, then go for it. But it takes more practice than it takes like a beautiful mind where you're just seeing formulas cross through, in front of you. It's definitely not that.
So I don't know if this is possible, and obviously we're not going to try to teach everyone how to do this on the podcast because you said it takes 200 hours of practice. But what is just like, okay, you're sitting at the table, what is like a general run through on one hand, like what's going through your mind when you see a card from the dealer, maybe you see a card next to you, what's going through your brain?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I could have probably given the elevator pitch earlier and people would, have a better idea what I'm talking about. There's really a couple steps to card counting. One is knowing the proper way to play every hand. It's a chart that you memorize, like how long does it take for someone to memorize a chart? Maybe could be 5 hours, could be 10 hours to just be able to know it perfectly. And then the next part is knowing how to count cards. And that is really just you're keeping track of a ratio of cards. So the beautiful thing, the thing that makes blackjack or traditional blackjack different from everything else in the casino is that everything in a casino is independent events. So if you throw dice at a craps table, if you throw a 7, that has zero impact on the next throw because every throw is independent. Same with the spin of a roulette wheel. If it's black, well, the next spin isn't any more likely to be red or black because they're independent events. Well, with blackjack, if a 2 of clubs comes out, that specific 2 of clubs will not be played again until they shuffle because it's left the deck or number of decks of cards that have been dealt until they shuffle again. So card counting is saying, hey, what kind of cards have left what they call a shoe? So let's say it's 6 decks. Like you're keeping track of small cards versus high cards. And when enough small cards have left relative to high cards, that means 1, that you're more likely to get a blackjack, which is really advantageous to the player. And 2, the way you play is going to work out in your favor more often. So without getting into the details, you're just, adding and subtracting by 1 the whole time. And then from there, you have to do some quick division at times to know how to bet. And that's another step or two if you want to get more advanced. But that's what it is in a nutshell. Playing every hand properly, and then adding and subtracting by 1 and occasionally doing quick division. And, it's just being able to do all those skills at once very, very perfectly accurate and quickly takes practice.
And are these standard across casinos as far as like the number of decks they're using, how often they shuffle?
No. So yeah, and there's definitely more that you need to know. That it's kind of like if you want to get into any sort of investing, you need to know, well, with card counts, we need to know our markets. We need to know like, oh, well, what are the rules? How many decks are they using? How far do they deal out before they shuffle? And those decisions are going to impact how much we can make.
So this is kind of a perfect segue into my next question. And you kind of touched on it before. I know you started with 2,000, but seems like you recommend like 3,000 or 4,000 to start. And I know that it's literally a 1% game. Like if you're playing even a 0.001% better than the dealer or better than the house, like you're going to start making money, even if it's just a little bit of money. But you probably need a decent sized pot to kind of get that ball rolling and see the percentages work in your favor. So what's a good ballpark amount for someone to start with who's just starting counting cards?
I have multiple friends that started with 3,000 and have grown it to 6 or 7 figures, but that's definitely on the low side of what you could start with. There's probably going to be more risk. It's kind of like investing in real estate. If you don't have very much money, you're going to have to do some high risk stuff, or and you're going to have to really hustle, and it's going to take a while before you can really do some of the larger investments. The thing with card counting is it totally works, but it takes time, like it takes a few hundred hours for, to overcome all the swings of the game. And so relative to like throwing your money in an index fund, it's a short-term investment, but it's not something where you just go to a casino with, $500 and walk out with 1,000. It doesn't work like that. You are investing with ups and downs. And the more you have, at your disposal, the more, if it's 1% advantage, if you're betting $100, well, then the expectation is $1. If you're betting $1,000, the expectation is $10. It's like the more you can bet, the more you can expect to make, but it does take time for it to all work out. It's a lot easier to get into than probably flipping properties or trying to make a living off of the stock market, but it takes more capital than starting a blog or, something like that.
So as we talk about kind of that relation between playing this game and investing, Has getting into counting cards, has it changed your mindset on investing at all? Like, did it give you a better stomach for saying like, hey, I know the markets are going to go down, but you just ride it out? Has it made you try to, pick individual stocks, or do you not even really mess with the stock market much because you just make all your money gambling?
Yeah, I've never done the stock market. It's kind of amazing that I haven't. And I was on a team with a guy that was a day trader, and he's a really sharp guy, but I'm not opposed to the stock market, but I would be more of a index fund guy. The people that are trying to pick stocks, I mean, you can look at the math behind it, but in one sense it's gambling. And I just feel like I can control my odds, I can control my risk, and I can, if I'm willing to put the time in at the tables, I can make more money from blackjack. I like real estate because that's where I put kind of long term. And then, starting an internet business was definitely a way to me to grow passive income when I didn't want to be at the tables as much.
Okay, so I kind of want to dig back into the story a little bit. So I know you mentioned you got 3 guys in your team at one point, but I know it has grown since then and in between the parts of the story we've been talking about in this podcast. So what happens next over those next few years? Once you get those 3 guys, could you just kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, so it was, me and Ben that started, and then a friend of ours, Jeff, got into it, and it was the 3 of us for a while, and then we met this 4th guy. He's the guy that was a day trader, and he's made quite a bit of money both at blackjack and day trading. And poker, honestly. But the 4 of us, we played as a team for a while, and we won a few $100,000, and then kind of started to feel like a grind. Kind of relational dynamics were difficult. So Ben and I went off. We tried to do real estate, and we did not know what we were doing. I think there was a false. I'll bet this happens with people. We were an expert at one thing, and so there's a false security that we knew what we were doing, and started just buying up, a couple $1 million worth of real estate, like highly leveraged. Really dumb, really, really dumb, at a really bad time. And so then it was like, let's do the only honest thing we know how to do and start counting cards again. And around that time, friends of ours started coming to us and saying, hey, can you train me and I'll play? And so we started this larger team, and that's what the documentary followed. A few dozen people went through that team, and the team won a few $1 million, but a little over $3 million. And that was really fun for a while. And then, even that started to feel like a grind. And I think I didn't know people that were into the FIRE movement back then, but my personality, once I had a taste of freedom, once I could choose to not answer the phone when they called for a substitute teaching gig, and once I got to choose how hard I worked or didn't work, it was like, there's no going back. There's no way. And so whenever a job has started to feel like a grind, I start getting bored and looking for something else to do. That combined with playing blackjack was really fun for a while. And then it wasn't, but running a team was really fun for a while until it wasn't. And I realized even running this team, it wasn't an asset. It was, I'd create a job for myself. I got paid if I trained and sent out people to go play blackjack, but I wanted an asset, something that, made money for me while I slept, that whole idea. And so that's why I started the website as a way to generate revenue. It's something that could be sold if I want to, or something that I put the work in and it's running in the background. And so the team disbanded, I don't know, 2011, something like that. And I've been running the website ever since. And that's been still fun. I'm, still feel challenged. And when I get bored, I just take 6 months off and then circle back around to it as long as I'm checking email.
Can you give us a rundown on the website a little bit, like what the offerings are, what people can expect if they go check it out?
Yeah, it's a membership site, and there's training and community training drills, like a forum, and then the thing I've had fun building out is the software. So like training software, betting software, casino database software. That stuff's fun because I'm able to help create all the things that I wish I would have had when I was either training or playing or running teams. And if I create it, it benefits, all of our members. That's what's on that end. And then I do, live trainings a few times a year for card counters.
So how many people do you currently have, or have you had go through these trainings? Like, is it a big group of people or do they ever meet up in person? Is it an online chat forum? I just love to kind of hear how that actually works on a tactical level.
With the live events, yeah, it's in person and it's in Vegas. We rent out a big fancy house and we just do, hands-on card counting training there. And I've got about a half dozen pro card counter friends of mine that help put it on. These are guys that have made 6 or 7 figures as card counters that are kind of giving back. And so we allow 20 people, try not to go over 21, which is kind of a blackjack pun. But
I like it.
20 or 21 people at the live events. And I do 3 or 4 of those a year, depending on how much energy I have.
So I know earlier we talked about how, maybe for your parents, it was sometimes a little difficult for them to bring up like, hey, my kid's counting cards. How do you think about that with your children? Like, would you teach them this skill?
Yeah. So my oldest, he's 12, and he's actually I've been working on some other what we call advantage play skills, like other ways to beat games that maybe take a little more brain power. And it's just kind of, for me, kind of a fun challenge to see if I can learn it. And he's my dealer. So I've taught him how to deal to me. So it's like father-son time. But, to me, I have no problem with it if he has the wisdom to handle it, or my daughters. I hope that I have enough influence in their lives that if they're like, hey, I want to, become a card counter or whatever, that we could have conversations and see if they could handle it emotionally, financially. Because you were saying earlier, I've got, a math mind or engineering mind. There's a kind of person that, an engineer isn't going to go on tilt. They've got this like very, follow the system, rigid mindset. And yeah, you're going to have emotional swings as a card counter. You're going to get upset when you're losing or whatever, but you have to have the right temperament. And if my kids have that temperament, it's fine with me. I'll train them up, and I'll take them to the casinos with me. Otherwise, honestly, there's just so many ways to gain financial independence now. There's a lot of ways to grow income outside of, traditional job, and maybe they're made for a traditional job, which is like, that's great. If they are, that's wonderful. Hopefully I can be a resource for them to help figure out the best fit for them.
So Colin, sounds like you have gone through the gamut. You've had a team, you've done this yourself. I don't know if you still are super active counting cards yourself and going to casinos. Probably not as much as when you were 23 years old and had all the time in the world. And now you have Blackjack Apprenticeship. What's next, man? What's on the horizon?
What's on the horizon? I don't know. When I think of kind of the goals for my family, it's definitely pour time and energy into my family and my kids, pour energy into the things that are important to us. There's some nonprofits we're really involved in, and it's also not being a financial burden on my kids when I'm older. So, I want to continue to save or invest and even set my kids up well. So it could be another internet business, starting a second thing. It could be honestly just doing what I'm doing and throwing. I think of money in terms of stewardship, like how to use it well. And so we definitely don't spend all that we make. We want to give generously, and then the rest I want to invest to kind of set us up for the future. But so it could just be Blackjack Apprenticeship for the next 20, 30 years. It could be another internet business, could be more real estate. I'm not sure.
All right, Colin. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And for those people who want to learn more about Blackjack, they want to learn more about Blackjack Apprenticeship, all you have to offer, maybe get in contact with you, where's the best places they can do that?
Yeah, blackjackapprenticeship.com. It's a long URL, but even if you Google it wrong, it will pop up there. And you can email me, Colin at blackjackapprenticeship.com. I have a book out that you can get wherever, Amazon. It's supposed to be in physical bookstores too. And so you can look for that if you want, or just shoot me an email. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
And what's the book called?
It's called The 21st Century Card Counter. So it's kind of my best training tips, advice for card counters, and then interviews with 12 of my buddies that have all had success with this.
Awesome. We'll definitely link all that up in the show notes.
And Colin, you've given us a lot of cool overviews of how card counting works and kind of that background of your life. But one thing we always like to ask is, what is one tangible tip you would give somebody that's trying to be on their path to financial independence?
I think a really important thing to think about is what's next, like what's after that? What if you had financial independence? Is it going to be a meaningful life or goal? Because, you could reach financial independence, and if you don't have a meaningful thing to be living for, you're gonna squander your time. And the goal isn't to have a tombstone that says, I was financially independent. It's to, live a life worth living. That can mean a lot of things for a lot of people. I know it means for me. So I think really just having that goal, I think you'll get there faster if you know why you want to get there. And really flesh that out. There's the easy answers like, I want to travel. Well, why and where? And, what's that going to do for you? And, so I think that serves people the best. Really, like, what's the biggest impact you can have on the world? And then fight for it. Fight to get there.
That's going to be one of my favorite answers to that question so far. So awesome
sure.
stuff. Yeah, that was good. So, Colin, this is the last and, of course, the most important question of the podcast. It is the wild card question where I'm not ready, Justin's not ready, which means, Colin, you're definitely not ready. But I'm going to ask it anyway. Okay, so this is super fitting for this episode, Colin. I want to hear about your craziest in-casino experience, whether it was getting kicked out in some crazy way or you see someone else jumping across the table, running across the casino naked. Like, just lay it down for us.
Oh man, I bumped into Mike Tyson once in a casino. That was I got a selfie with him, but I think to me the one that comes to mind is the one time that I was kind of detained into the back room of a casino. I didn't have to. I went willingly, but me and the three guys I was on the original team with, we beat some casinos in Arizona for a lot of money, and we went to cash out $140,000 of chips all at once, which is really, and we had one person do it. It was just so dumb. We should have split it up, and we just crushed these casinos, and I don't think they realized how badly we were beating them until we went to cash out all this money, and they wouldn't cash us out. And so we went into this back room, and it's these security guards in suits and, white tables in this white room, and they were asking us how we cheated them. And we said, well, we didn't cheat. We were counting cards. And they said, well, how did you know how to bet? And one of the guys I was on the team with said, I'll tell you, for a fee.
Oh my God.
And eventually they like checked every chip under a black light to make sure it wasn't fraudulent. And they, escort us to the cashier's cage, cash us out. We walk out with our $140,000. And then they, told us we'd be arrested if we ever came back to their casino, and never went back. But that's probably the one that comes to mind.
Most baller move would have been to slide him your business card for Blackjack. That would have been hilarious.
Probably would have done that if we had the website at that point. Probably would have.
Well, Colin, thank you so much for coming on the show. I mean, as an engineer myself, I know this actually has me excited to go out there and kind of look into this and see, would I be up for this little challenge? It's a very cool story that I don't think many people get to hear in the financial independence kind of realm, but we're so glad you came and shared it with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. And even if people aren't in card counting, hopefully this is helpful just thinking in terms of, shrewd investors and thinking in terms of the long term.
Absolutely.
All right, Justin, you ready to hit the casino?
Man, I've spent a lot of time on a roulette table, but now he's got me thinking I was playing the wrong game.
Yeah, and this is just such a crazy story. I mean, he kind of has that super combo that I was talking to him about earlier in the podcast, where he has this saving and frugality mindset where he's stocking away money, but at the same time, he kind of has this interest in taking it above and beyond just a traditional 9-to-5 job or just sticking to the average or being the norm. Like, he's always looking for ways to outperform, to do things in a more optimal way, and it clearly shines through in this episode where he just starts card counting and runs with it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it would be irresponsible for us not to say, like, hey, if you don't have the stomach for this, if you don't have the ability to keep yourself between the lanes, like, don't go to the casino with your money and lose your family's money. But if this is something where you're responsible, much like when we say, credit cards aren't for everyone, but credit cards are great tools for some people when you get into travel rewards. So kind of a very similar thing. Like, if you can play within the rules, this is a way for you to actually have an advantage at a casino. And it's not illegal, and it's a really cool kind of fun thing. And I have to imagine much the same way there's this financial community. It's probably like a really cool, network of these guys out there counting cards that it's just where you're bouncing skills off of people, and it's just another hobby you could get into.
And just to reiterate, I mean, Justin and I are not telling everyone to go out and start counting cards. I know we already mentioned that. Colin did say you should have at least $3,000. So if you don't have $3,000 to just play around with and lose, because you might lose it, you might not be as great as you think you are on your first go around. So please don't try this. This side hustle is not for everyone, but we would be remiss if we just didn't cover certain side hustles because we thought they were too risky or something like that. So we really want to have Colin on. He has an incredible story. I know from doing personal research on him, he's donating a lot of money. He's doing great things with his family. He's teaching other people how to do this. This is just an awesome guy who has a side hustle that many people just may not have the stomach for.
I think some of the other interesting points of the episode were, like, hey, he's comfortable teaching his kids about this. And then the other thing was he actually doesn't even touch the stock market, which for most of us would probably seem crazy. But, he does use real estate, which a lot of people in this space are very used to and comfortable with. But he's found something that works for him. And I say all that to say it's just another example to highlight that there's so many ways to get there. And it's all about, having this freedom, this financial independence, this ability to kind of design your own life. And it's not so much about like, here's a rule book and this is exactly how you have to get there.
And honestly, Justin, I think this was top 3 answers for our question for what's the number 1 tip for someone on the path to financial independence. And he's like, you know what? It's about the entire journey of your life. Like, if you hit financial independence and then you die, you don't want "I hit financial independence" on my tombstone. You probably want something cool you did, whether it was support a charity, start this cool group. You know, it was something that's outside of money. It wasn't related to money, because money is just a tool to help you live a life that's awesome, a life that you love, a life by design. And I really liked how Colin kind of took that spin and took that angle on it. He's not trying to be as rich as possible. You know, he's not trying to stack millions and millions away in the bank. He's trying to live a good life for him and his family, leave a legacy, show other people how to do this. And that just really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, I mean, I love the part where he's like, you know, everybody says, "Hey, I want to travel." And he's like, "Why? What is that going to do for you? You know, what are you going to get out of it?" Because it's an easy answer to give. Like, yeah, I just want to travel. I just don't want to have any responsibility. But, you know, you've heard a lot of people say it. You got to have something to retire to. I mean, this is kind of another way of saying it. It's that financial freedom, while for some people they may have a ton of stress in their life that they could absolutely get off their shoulders by having that, you know, that financial backing, it's not a magic pill to where all of a sudden, like, you're going to get to a point to where now you have those stresses off your back, but maybe you still have some problems in your life, but then all of a sudden, just because you're not working, just everything is fixed. You got to be thinking about, when you get ready to really punch your ticket and say, "Okay, I'm done," what are you going to be doing? Why are you going to be doing it? Much more importantly.
And one last thing that I thought was pretty important that Colin talked about was he was really against complacency. Like, even though he had a successful business, he was, say, when he was card counting by himself, making upwards of $400 an hour. He was sick of it, so he stopped doing it. Then he built this team up. They're making $4 million or $3.2 million in a year. He got sick of it. He stopped doing it. And then he started Blackjack Apprenticeship, and he's been running it ever since. So he's a perfect example of, if he was feeling burnt out, he's like, you know what? I can just stop. I don't have to do this. I can step away from this for 6 months. I can go do something else and see what actually gets me going, see what gets me excited in the morning. I really liked that he had a focus on that too, staying happy while he's building all these businesses out.
Yeah, and I couldn't believe it when... Whoa.
What was that, Justin?
It's a call to action, Cody. And the call to action this week is just sit down and write out like 5 things that you imagine that you want to do in retirement. This doesn't need to have any really numbers involved. This is more of a psychological, breakdown. Write down a few things that you imagine you want to do in retirement. And then out next to it, just say why you think you want to do it. Like, really challenge yourself to think about why you chose that list of things.
I love that, Justin. I'm going to draft up my list tonight and see if it kind of pans out with what I was thinking. And if this episode really interested you, you're like, know what? Colin seems like a cool guy. Blackjack and card counting seems fun. Seems like something I'll be interested in. You can check out way more information on Colin. You can look at the documentary over at thefishow.com/Colin. And if you want to join one of the most inclusive, fun place where you can talk about anything money related Facebook groups on the internet, you can do that at thefishow.com/community. And last but not least, we really appreciate those 5-star ratings and reviews. It lets us get awesome guests like Colin and other interesting people who are doing amazing things on The Fi Show. So thanks for listening.
See you on next week's episode of The Fi Show.